The Apache woman, over 2 meters high. No man could handle her until a rancher arrived. In a quiet corner of the desert plains, where the land stretched wide and the sky seemed endless, there lived a woman unlike any other. She belonged to an Apache village that was small but full of life. Children ran freely among the adobe homes, and the air was always filled with the sounds of drums, laughter, and the occasional song. The people of the village were proud and hardworking, bound together by tradition and respect for the land. But even among them, this woman stood out. She was over 2 meters tall, a height that made her tower over almost everyone else. Her presence was striking, and it was impossible not to notice her when she entered a room. From a young age, she had been different. While other girls played with dolls or helped with small household tasks, she was climbing trees, running across the desert, and learning skills that even some men in the village found challenging. She could lift heavy bundles of firewood with ease, ride horses at full speed without fear, and move through the desert with a grace that made her seem almost like she belonged to the land itself. Her strength and courage were admired by many, but they also made her different in ways that made life difficult. The men of the village, in particular, were both fascinated and intimidated by her. Some tried to talk to her, to win her attention, but none could match her energy or her determination. She had a will of iron and a stubborn streak that refused to bend. If a man tried to show off or act superior, she would simply ignore him or prove her point in some clever way. Stories began to spread not just in her village, but in nearby villages too. People whispered about the tall Apache woman who no man could handle. They spoke of her strength, her courage, and her independence, and soon she became almost a legend in her own lifetime. Despite her fame, life for her was not always easy. Being taller and stronger than everyone else brought challenges. Doors had to be modified, beds were too small, and many of the village games or dances felt uncomfortable for her. Even though she was admired, she often felt lonely. The children liked her, and the elders respected her, but she longed for someone who could see her for who she truly was, not just her height or her strength. She wanted friendship, companionship, and perhaps even love, but she had not yet found anyone who could match her spirit. Her days were filled with work. She helped her family tend to the small fields where corn and beans grew. She went hunting with the men, tracking rabbits, deer, and sometimes even larger game. Her skill with a bow and arrow was unmatched, and she rarely missed a target. She could carry water from the distant river, build shelters, and repair the village's fences without any help. People often said she could do the work of 3 ordinary villagers, and sometimes even the men joked that she could single-handedly defend the village if danger came. But despite all this, she was not proud or boastful. She understood that her strength was a gift, and she used it to help her family and her community. She had a kind heart, though it was hidden behind her fierce independence. Children loved to follow her, watching her work and learning from her. They were never afraid of her, and she would often tell them stories of the land, the animals, and the ancestors who had come before. She wanted them to know that strength was not just about physical power, but about courage, kindness, and determination. The village had a routine, but her presence made every day more exciting. When she walked through the streets, heads would turn. People admired her, but they also gave her space, understanding that she was not someone to be trifled with. Some visitors to the village tried to challenge her strength, often in a joking way, but she was quick-witted and clever. She never needed to prove herself with violence. A simple demonstration of skill or clever thinking was enough to earn respect. Even at night, when the village settled down under the wide, starry sky, she would often sit alone and think. She thought about the future, about who she wanted to be, and about the kind of life she wanted to live. She dreamed of exploring the world beyond the desert plains, though she also loved the home she had in the village. She knew that one day, someone might come along who could understand her and share in her life, not someone to control her, but someone to walk beside her as an equal. That thought gave her hope, though she had no idea when or if it would happen. Life continued like this for many years. She grew stronger, wiser, and even more skilled. People from other villages would come to see her, bringing stories, gifts, or questions. They were curious about the tall Apache woman who could do things that others could only dream of. Some were awed, some frightened, and some simply wanted to meet her. She treated everyone with respect, but she was careful to maintain her independence. She had learned from a young age that strength was valuable, but respect was earned through actions, not appearances. Her family was proud of her, though they sometimes worried about her loneliness. They wished she could find someone who would match her strength and spirit. But the woman always reassured them. She was content, she said, to live a life of purpose and meaning. She knew that someday, someone might arrive who could understand her, someone who would not fear her strength or try to change her. Until then, she would continue to live her life fully, embracing every challenge, every adventure, and every moment with courage and determination. The desert around the village was harsh, but it had taught her resilience. She had learned to read the signs of the wind, to know when rain was coming, and to track animals across vast distances. Every day was a lesson, and every task was an opportunity to grow stronger and wiser. She thrived in this environment, and in turn, the village thrived with her help. People looked up to her, and even though she was different, she was an essential part of the community. Over time, her story began to spread beyond the village. Travelers would bring tales of the towering Apache woman, the one no man could handle. Some stories were exaggerated, turning her into a figure of myth. But those who truly knew her understood the real woman, strong, skilled, independent, and kind-hearted. She was a living reminder that courage and strength could exist alongside compassion and wisdom. Yet, despite her legendary reputation, she remained humble. She did not seek attention or praise. Her goal was simply to live a good life, to help those around her, and to honor the traditions of her people. She worked hard, she laughed when she could, and she cared deeply for the children and elders of the village. People admired her not just for her height or strength, but for her character. She was someone who inspired others to be better, to try harder, and to live with courage. And so, life went on in the village. Each day brought new challenges, new lessons, and new opportunities for the tall Apache woman. She faced each moment with determination, grace, and the quiet knowledge that she was capable of anything she set her mind to. Though no man had yet matched her spirit, she remained hopeful that one day, someone would come who could understand her fully, not as a towering figure of strength, but as a woman with a heart, a mind, and a soul as vast as the desert itself. Her story was only beginning. The desert winds carried her name, and the people of the village watched with a mixture of pride and wonder, knowing that the life of this remarkable woman would continue to inspire generations to come, even though the tall Apache woman was admired and respected in her village. There were days when she felt a deep sense of loneliness. Life for her was full of work, adventure, and respect, but it was also a life lived largely alone. The villagers loved her and relied on her strength, but they could not fill the emptiness that sometimes grew in her heart. She had friends among the children, who adored following her and listening to her stories, and the elders, who trusted her skill and wisdom. But she longed for someone closer, someone who could understand her not just as a strong figure, but as a woman with hopes, dreams, and a gentle heart. The men she met over the years often intimidated her. Many had heard the stories of her strength and independence before even seeing her. Some came out of curiosity, wanting to see if they could impress her with their own skills. Others were attracted to her beauty, which was striking in its own way, though her height often made her seem almost untouchable. But no man could meet her on equal footing. Those who tried were usually humbled quickly. Some were discouraged by her confidence, Others felt outmatched in skill or intelligence. She never sought to hurt anyone's pride, but she could not pretend to be someone she was not. This became a pattern in her life. The more she grew older, the more she realized that few people could truly understand her. She watched as young men her age got married, started families, and built lives alongside women who could meet them in ways she could not. She felt a pang of longing, but she never let it dominate her. Instead, she focused on the life she had, taking pride in her independence. She knew that being alone did not mean being weak. On the contrary, it meant she was strong enough to survive and thrive without needing anyone else to hold her up. The desert surrounding her village was a harsh teacher, shaping her character as much as her size and skill did. Each day brought new lessons, and she approached them with the same determination she brought to all aspects of her life. She rose before sunrise to gather water, prepare food, and tend to her family's land. She worked tirelessly, her long arms and strong legs making even the hardest tasks look effortless. Yet, she never let her work isolate her completely. She often smiled at neighbors, shared stories with children, and offered help to anyone in need. Her strength was visible, but her kindness was quiet, like a river flowing just beneath the surface. Sometimes, she would wander into the desert alone. These trips were not just for survival or work. They were moments of reflection, moments when she could think freely. The desert, with its endless horizon and the sound of the wind through the rocks, made her feel small and yet connected to something much larger. She thought about the future, about what it meant to be human, and about what kind of person she wanted to be. She dreamed of a companion, someone who could walk beside her, not ahead or behind, but as an equal. She knew such a person might be rare, but she held on to the hope that they existed somewhere in the vast world. Her family noticed her moments of quiet reflection. They respected her independence and never pressured her to marry, but they sometimes spoke gently about companionship. They wanted her to experience the kind of love and friendship that others seemed to take for granted. She listened politely, but always said she was content. Still, when she was alone, she could not help but imagine what it would be like to have someone who truly understood her. Visitors to the village often brought curiosity along with them. Travelers would arrive, telling stories of distant lands, bringing gifts, or asking questions about her extraordinary skills. Some were impressed by her height and strength, while others were fearful. A few tried to challenge her in harmless games or competitions, thinking that perhaps they could impress her by demonstrating courage or skill. But she had a quiet intelligence that allowed her to navigate these situations gracefully. She never needed to show off, yet she always left a lasting impression. Those who met her understood that she was more than just a figure of strength. She was a woman of sharp mind, quick reflexes, and deep wisdom. Despite the attention, her heart still felt a quiet longing. She observed couples walking together in the village, sharing laughter and small gestures of care. She saw the tenderness in the eyes of parents toward their children, the way friends comforted one another. And she wondered if she would ever find someone who could share such simple joys with her. She longed not just for love, but for a true partnership, someone who could walk beside her, respect her, and appreciate her for all that she was. She also began to notice the difference between admiration and understanding. Many admired her because she was strong and different, but few understood the depth of her thoughts and emotions. They saw her height, her skill with animals, or her ability to lift heavy objects, but they did not always see her dreams, fears, or hopes. This realization was bittersweet. She loved being admired, but she wanted someone who could look beyond the surface, someone who could see her heart as well as her strength. The tall Apache woman also had moments of frustration. Sometimes, people assumed she needed no help because she was capable of doing everything herself. Some tried to take advantage of her abilities, asking her to do more than her fair share of work, assuming she could manage anything. She would quietly, politely, and firmly set boundaries, teaching people to respect her time and energy. Her assertiveness became part of her identity. People learned that while she was strong and capable, she was not to be taken for granted. Her solitude did not prevent her from enjoying life. She loved simple pleasures, the sound of birds at sunrise, the warmth of the sun on her face, the taste of fresh corn from the fields. She delighted in teaching children how to run through the desert safely, how to find water, and how to observe the natural world with care. She told them stories of her ancestors, passing down lessons of courage, wisdom, and resilience. Through these acts, she felt connected to her community and to the generations that came before her. Over the years, she also developed a quiet understanding of people. She could sense their intentions and emotions with a clarity that surprised many. When someone approached her, she could tell if they were honest, curious, or trying to deceive. This intuition became a valuable skill, helping her navigate the world around her safely. She learned to trust her instincts, and she knew that one day they would guide her towards someone worthy of her trust and respect. Even though life was challenging, she found joy in her independence. She could hunt alone, navigate the desert, and perform tasks that required immense strength and intelligence. These accomplishments were satisfying, yet they also reminded her that the companionship she sought was still missing. She dreamed of someone who could challenge her not physically, but emotionally and mentally, a partner who could share ideas, laughter, and the quiet moments of life. As seasons passed, her reputation as the towering Apache woman grew far beyond the village. People from neighboring communities would come to see her, bringing questions, stories, and sometimes gifts. Some were awed by her height and strength, while others were curious about her skills and independence. But even with all this attention, she remained focused on her own life and values. She did not seek fame or admiration. She simply lived according to her principles, embracing her work, her community, and the natural world around her. Through all of this, she held on to hope. She knew that life was full of surprises and that the desert could bring unexpected encounters. She believed that one day, someone might appear who could understand her fully, not intimidated by her height or strength, but inspired by her courage, intelligence, and heart. Until that day came, she continued her life with determination, grace, and optimism, knowing that her worth was not measured by others, but by the way she lived each day. The Apache woman's story in this part of her life was one of quiet strength and enduring hope. She faced loneliness, misunderstanding, and occasional frustration, yet she never allowed these challenges to define her. Instead, she grew stronger, wiser, and more patient. She nurtured the community, cared for her family, and inspired the children who followed her. And deep in her heart, she carried a vision of a future where she might find someone to walk beside her as an equal, a future where her independence and strength would not intimidate, but complement, a shared life filled with respect, understanding, and love. Even as the wind blew across the desert, carrying dust and whispers from distant lands, she felt connected to the larger world. She knew that her life was not ordinary, but it was meaningful. Every day brought new lessons, challenges, and opportunities for growth. And though no man had yet matched her spirit, she remained confident that someday, someone worthy would arrive. Someone who could appreciate her fully, not just for her strength, her height, or her skill, but for the woman she truly was, courageous, compassionate, and unbreakably resilient. The story of her solitude, her hope, and her wisdom was just beginning to unfold. And though the desert was wide and the world beyond her village vast, she was ready to face whatever came her way, carrying her dreams and her strength as she walked proudly into the unknown, waiting for the moment when the right companion would arrive. One summer morning, the quiet rhythm of the village was interrupted by the arrival of a stranger. A rancher had come, riding across the dusty plains from the distant mountains. He was a tall man, rugged from years of working under the sun, with strong hands that bore the marks of hard labor. His clothes were worn, his boots dusty, and yet there was a calm confidence in the way he carried himself. He came not to challenge anyone, not to boast, but to find work, to start a life in this new land. The villagers watched him with curiosity. They were polite but cautious. Outsiders often arrived with intentions that were not always clear. Some were traders, some were travelers, and some sought fortune at the expense of others. But this man moved with an ease and honesty that made people pause. He did not look around with arrogance, nor did he try to impress anyone. He simply dismounted from his horse, tied the reins carefully, and began to talk to the village elders about the work he could offer. When the tall Apache woman saw him, she felt something she had never felt before. Unlike the men who had tried to impress her in the past, this stranger did not seem intimidated by her height, her strength, or her reputation. He treated her like an equal, acknowledging her skill without fear or judgment. She noticed the way he observed her from a distance, not with curiosity, but with genuine interest in her abilities and her presence. There was a quiet respect in his eyes, something different from the fear, awe, or awkwardness she had seen in others. At first, she kept her distance. She had learned over the years that caution was necessary when dealing with strangers. She watched him as he worked with the villagers, helping to mend fences, guide the cattle, and repair buildings. He did not boast about his work, nor did he complain about the heat or the hard labor. Instead, he moved with steady confidence, taking direction when needed, but also using his own knowledge to solve problems efficiently. The villagers began to notice that he was dependable and respectful, someone who would not take advantage of them or cause trouble. The tall Apache woman could not help but be curious. She had spent her life testing the limits of her strength and independence, and she had learned to read people carefully. There was something in this rancher that felt different, something that hinted at understanding rather than competition. She observed him quietly, noting how he treated the animals, how he listened to advice, and how he worked without seeking attention. There was a calmness about him that contrasted sharply with the rest of the world, a balance of humility and skill that intrigued her. Days passed, and the rancher continued his work in the village. The tall Apache woman began to notice small things that caught her attention. He never tried to dominate a conversation, yet when he spoke, people listened. He laughed at the right moments, offered help without expectation, and showed patience even when tasks were difficult. More importantly, he did not shy away from her presence. He acknowledged her skill with a nod, shared quiet words of encouragement when needed, and never made her feel smaller or different. It was as if he understood without being told that she was not a woman to be controlled or tamed, but to be respected and admired for who she was. One afternoon, the village faced a challenge. A sudden storm had damaged part of the cattle pen, and the animals were restless. The tall Apache woman had already been working to calm the herd, but the task was too large for her alone. The rancher stepped forward without hesitation. Together, they guided the frightened animals into safety. Their movements were synchronized, almost instinctive. She was impressed by his skill and calmness under pressure, and he was equally impressed by her strength and precision. For the first time in her life, she felt a sense of partnership with another person, a feeling that was both new and comforting. After that day, their interactions became more frequent. They worked together on small tasks, repaired fences, and guided the cattle across the plains. The tall Apache woman found herself speaking to him more than she had spoken to anyone in years. She shared knowledge of the land, the ways of the animals, and the history of her people. He listened with genuine interest, never interrupting, never pretending to know more than he did. She realized that she could trust him in a way she had never trusted a man before. There was no fear, no need for pretense, only mutual respect and a shared understanding of work, life, and the land. villagers began to notice the change. The tall Apache woman, who had always been independent, seemed more relaxed when the rancher was near. She smiled more often, laughed more freely, and carried herself with a lighter air. The children were fascinated by their teamwork, watching in awe as they guided animals, repaired structures, and solved problems together. The elders noticed the way the rancher treated her as an equal, never seeking to overshadow or control her, and they were quietly pleased. They could see that a connection was forming, one built on respect, skill, and shared values, not fear or intimidation. The rancher himself was aware of her remarkable presence. He admired her strength, her courage, and her intelligence, but he was careful not to overwhelm her. He approached her with patience, letting her set the pace of their interactions. He asked questions, learned from her knowledge of the land, and shared his own experiences without boasting. Slowly, he earned her trust, proving that he was not just another man who would be frightened by her strength or reputation. He understood that true connection required respect and equality, and he was willing to wait for that connection to grow. Evenings became moments of quiet companionship. After a day of hard work, they would sit together near the fire, sharing simple meals and stories. The tall Apache woman found herself enjoying his company in ways she had not expected. He did not try to dominate the conversation or impress her with tales of adventure. He listened, asked thoughtful questions, and responded with gentle honesty. In his presence, she felt seen, not just for her strength but for her mind, her heart, and her spirit. For the first time in many years, she felt a sense of peace and belonging. Over time, the bond between them grew stronger. They discovered common values: respect for the land, dedication to hard work, and a desire for honest, meaningful connections. The rancher admired her independence and skill, while she respected his patience, humility, and reliability. Together, they became a team, facing challenges side by side and learning from one another. Their partnership was not built on romantic expectation, but on mutual understanding and shared purpose. The villagers watched with quiet amazement. The tall Apache woman, who had long been known as untouchable and unmatched, had found someone who could stand beside her without fear or judgment. It was a new chapter in her life, one that filled her with hope and curiosity. She realized that strength and independence did not mean she had to be alone forever. There were people in the world who could appreciate her fully, and this rancher was one of them. As days turned into weeks, their teamwork became effortless. They learned each other's rhythms, anticipated each other's needs, and solved problems together with a natural flow. She taught him the ways of the desert, the habits of the animals, and the traditions of her people. He taught her practical skills in ranching, irrigation, and animal care that she had not learned in her village. Through this exchange, they both grew stronger, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. The tall Apache woman began to realize that this partnership was different from anything she had experienced before. She had always been independent, proud, and cautious, but she found herself opening her heart in ways she had never done. The rancher did not seek to change her or diminish her strength. Instead, he complemented it. He respected her opinions, sought her guidance, and shared the burdens of work and life equally. She realized that perhaps this was the kind of companionship she had been waiting for all along, a true equal, someone who could match her spirit without trying to overpower it. By the end of the summer, the connection between them was undeniable. While words of love had not yet been spoken, their actions and presence conveyed a deep understanding and respect. The tall Apache woman, who had long walked alone, felt a sense of comfort and anticipation she had never known. She began to dream of a future where they could continue working side by side, sharing not just the labor of the land, but the joys, challenges, and quiet moments of life. Their story in this chapter was one of patience, observation, and mutual respect. Neither rushed the other, neither sought to dominate or impress. Instead, they allowed trust to grow naturally, letting each day bring them closer. The tall Apache woman learned that independence did not mean isolation, and the rancher demonstrated that strength could coexist with humility. Together, they discovered that true partnership was built on understanding, patience, and respect, a foundation that promised something lasting and meaningful. The villagers continued their lives around them, but quietly, many were inspired by what they saw. They witnessed two strong, independent people finding a way to work together, support one another, and share life without fear or judgment. The tall Apache woman, who had long been admired for her strength, now revealed another side, a heart capable of trust, a mind capable of learning and sharing, and a spirit ready for connection. Even as the sun set over the desert, casting long shadows across the plains, she felt a quiet excitement. The rancher had come into her life not to change her, not to challenge her, but to stand beside her. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope that life could be shared, not with compromise, but with equality, respect, and mutual care. Over the weeks that followed, the tall Apache woman and the rancher began to spend more time together. Their connection, which had started with mutual respect and quiet observation, slowly deepened into a strong partnership. They worked together on almost every task in the village, from guiding cattle and tending the fields to repairing fences and building shelters. At first, their teamwork was practical and cautious, but with each shared task, they began to understand each other in ways words could not describe. Their movements became synchronized, almost as if they could anticipate each other's thoughts before speaking. She noticed the small ways he respected her. He never made decisions for her or assumed she could not handle a task. Instead, he asked for her advice, listened carefully to her suggestions, and followed her lead when needed. This was a stark contrast to the men she had met before, who often tried to impress her with strength or boastfulness. With him, there was no pretense. There was no attempt to dominate or control. He simply worked alongside her as an equal, and she felt a sense of relief she had never known. She could be herself, strong, independent, and capable, without having to hide any part of who she was. The rancher, for his part, was equally impressed by her abilities. He admired the way she moved through the desert, how she handled animals, and how quickly she solved problems that might have stumped others. Yet he never let admiration turn into fear or envy. Instead, he treated her as a partner in every sense of the word. He asked for her input on decisions, shared his own knowledge when appropriate, and always made sure that their efforts were balanced. Over time, they began to trust each other completely, knowing that neither would let the other down in any situation. One afternoon, a challenge arose that would test their partnership. A sudden heat wave had left the village's water supply low, and the cattle were restless. Many villagers were worried, unsure how they would manage the situation. The tall Apache woman quickly assessed the problem and began planning a solution. The rancher joined her immediately, offering his knowledge of irrigation and water storage. Together, they organized a system to carry water to the fields and the animals, using teamwork and skill to solve the crisis. The process was difficult, exhausting, and required constant attention. Yet as they worked, they laughed at small mistakes, encouraged each other when fatigue set in, and celebrated the successes along the way. The tall Apache woman realized that she had never experienced this kind of companionship before. She had always worked hard and solved problems on her own, but there was a joy in sharing the labor with someone she respected and trusted. The rancher did not diminish her strength. He complemented it, making her feel capable and appreciated in equal measure. The villagers began to notice the change in her demeanor. She was more relaxed, her laughter more frequent, and her patience with others seemed to grow. She no longer felt the same tension that had existed when men had tried to approach her in the past. The rancher's presence was calming and reassuring, and it allowed her to express a side of herself that had remained hidden for years. She could speak openly, share her thoughts, and even make mistakes without fear of judgment. Evenings became a special time for them. After a day of hard work, they would sit together near the fire, eating simple meals and sharing stories of the land, their lives, and their experiences. Sometimes they would speak of dreams for the future, other times of memories from the past. The rancher listened with genuine interest, never interrupting or dismissing her thoughts. In return, he shared his own stories, not to boast, but to create a bond of honesty and understanding. Slowly, a deep emotional connection began to form, one that went beyond admiration or respect. Through these moments, the tall Apache woman began to notice the little things that made him different from anyone she had ever known. He noticed when she was tired, offering help without comment. He remembered small details she had mentioned days before, showing that he valued her words and ideas. He did not try to impress her with physical feats or loud displays of skill. Instead, he quietly demonstrated his worth through patience, kindness, and reliability. This consistency reassured her in a way she had never experienced before. As they continued to work together, their trust grew stronger. They learned to communicate without words, understanding each other's intentions and movements instinctively. Whether guiding animals, repairing structures, or walking across the desert, they moved as a single unit. This partnership gave the tall Apache woman a sense of peace and stability that she had never felt. She realized that true partnership was not about dominance or control, but about respect, balance, and shared responsibility. Over time, she also discovered that the rancher could challenge her in ways that were meaningful. He did not compete with her strength, but he encouraged her to think in new ways, to consider different approaches, and to test her problem-solving skills. In turn, she taught him lessons about the desert, the animals, and the traditions of her people. Their relationship became a constant exchange of knowledge, a shared growth that strengthened both of them. The children of the village adored watching them work together. They were fascinated by how the tall Apache woman, who had always seemed so independent, could cooperate so seamlessly with another person. They saw her laugh, joke, and teach the rancher about the land and its creatures. They noticed his patience and attentiveness, and how he respected her strength and knowledge. In their eyes, the two adults represented an ideal balance of skill, wisdom, and kindness. The elders, too, were quietly pleased. They had long admired the tall Apache woman for her strength, courage, and independence. Now, they saw her forming a partnership with someone who could match her spirit and respect her fully. It was a rare sight in the village, and it brought a sense of hope and joy to those who valued the traditions and stability of their community. Through all of this, the tall Apache woman began to understand her own heart in a new way. She had always valued independence and self-reliance, but she realized that true strength did not mean standing alone. It meant having the courage to trust, to share responsibilities, and to allow someone else into her life without fear. The rancher had not come to take control or diminish her power. Instead, he had arrived to walk beside her, equally capable, equally respected, and equally valued. Their bond grew quietly, without fanfare or public declarations. They spent long hours working, laughing, and sharing stories. They began to depend on each other in ways that went beyond physical labor. When one was tired, the other would step in. When one faced a problem, the other offered solutions or support. The partnership became a foundation of trust, a relationship built on equality, patience, and shared values. The tall Apache woman noticed that her feelings were changing. She felt joy in his presence, comfort in his steadiness, and admiration for his character. Yet she was cautious. She had been disappointed in the past, and she did not want to rush into something that might disrupt the balance they had created. She valued their partnership above all else, and understood that true connection took time, effort, and patience. The rancher, too, felt the bond growing stronger. He admired her courage, skill, and independence. He respected her deeply and knew that any attempt to force closeness would destroy the trust they had built. Instead, he focused on being reliable, attentive, and supportive. He allowed the relationship to develop naturally, confident that patience and respect would strengthen their connection over time. As the weeks turned into months, their partnership became the heartbeat of their daily lives. They faced challenges together, celebrated small victories, and created routines that balanced work, rest, and shared experiences. The tall Apache woman felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known. She realized that independence did not mean isolation, and that true companionship could enhance her life without diminishing her strength. Even in the quiet moments, their connection was evident. They would sit together watching the sun rise or set, talking softly about dreams and hopes for the future. They shared laughter, small adventures, and the simple pleasures of life in the village and on the plains. In these moments, they discovered a deep emotional bond, one built on trust, respect, and understanding. The villagers continued to watch in quiet admiration. The tall Apache woman, who had long been a figure of independence and strength, had found someone who could walk beside her without fear or judgment. Their partnership was a living example of equality, patience, and mutual respect. It was not a relationship built on fear or control, but on trust, care, and the quiet joy of shared experiences. By the end of this chapter of her life, the tall Apache woman had come to understand a truth she had long suspected but never fully embraced. That partnership did not mean giving up independence, and that true strength could exist alongside trust, respect, and emotional connection. The rancher had become more than a companion in work. He had become a partner in life, someone she could rely on, learn from, and grow with. Together, they had created a bond that promised a future filled with shared challenges, growth, and joy. Their partnership was not about domination or control, but about balance, understanding, and the quiet strength that comes from mutual respect. And for the first time in her life, the tall Apache woman felt that her independence and strength could coexist with a deep, meaningful connection, one that would carry her into the next chapter of her extraordinary life. Seasons changed, and life in the village continued, but something had shifted for the tall Apache woman. Her days were still filled with work, the desert still demanded her strength, and the village still relied on her skill. Yet now, there was a quiet warmth that accompanied her efforts, a presence she could rely on, a partnership that made even the hardest tasks lighter. The rancher had become more than a companion in work. He was a part of her life in ways that no one else had ever been. Their days began before sunrise. They worked together, tending to the animals, repairing fences, and guiding the fields through the heat of the day. Sometimes they walked in silence, each focused on the tasks at hand, but always aware of the other's presence. There was comfort in this quiet companionship. The tall Apache woman, who had once felt the weight of solitude, now felt the balance of shared effort. She realized that true partnership did not lessen her independence. It enhanced it, allowing her to accomplish more, to grow stronger, and to experience joy alongside someone who understood her completely. Evenings became their moments of reflection and laughter. After long days, they would sit by the fire, sharing simple meals, talking quietly, and sometimes watching the stars appear over the desert horizon. These were moments the tall Apache woman cherished. She had lived most of her life independent, admired for her strength, but never fully understood for her heart. With the rancher, that understanding came naturally. He listened without judgment, laughed with genuine delight at her humor, and responded to her thoughts with kindness and insight. She realized that she had never truly known companionship until now. The villagers noticed the change as well. The tall Apache woman, once seen as untouchable and solitary, now moved with a relaxed grace. Her laughter was more frequent, her patience with others deeper, and her guidance more gentle yet confident. Children followed them, fascinated by their teamwork, watching as they shared knowledge and solved problems together. Elders smiled quietly, seeing the partnership as a sign that even the strongest and most independent among them could find someone worthy of respect and trust. Together, they faced challenges that tested their skill, patience, and cooperation. One particularly dry summer, a fire broke out on the plains near the village. Smoke rose into the sky, and panic threatened to spread among the villagers. The tall Apache woman and the rancher immediately took action. She guided people in moving animals to safety, while he helped build barriers to protect the homes and fields. They worked side by side, their movements synchronized, their decisions complementing each other perfectly. The villagers watched in awe as the two figures commanded the crisis, their partnership saving both lives and property. Through these trials, the tall Apache woman realized that this was what she had been longing for all along, not just companionship, but a true equal who could walk beside her through life's challenges. She understood that independence did not mean isolation, and strength did not require solitude. In the rancher, she had found someone who could share both her burdens and her joys, someone who respected her fully and complimented her in every way. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped low behind the desert mountains, they sat together watching the sky turn shades of pink and gold. The tall Apache woman felt a deep sense of peace. She thought of all the years she had spent alone, admired for her strength but misunderstood in her heart. Now, she realized that her journey had led her to this moment, a partnership that honored her independence, embraced her courage, and celebrated her spirit. The rancher's presence was steady, comforting, and unwavering. She could rely on him without fear, trust him without hesitation, and share her thoughts without reservation. As days passed, their connection grew stronger. They celebrated small victories together, the first green shoots of crops in the spring, the safe arrival of new animals, the laughter of children learning from their lessons. They also supported each other through moments of difficulty, the sudden illness of a villager, the loss of an animal, or the hardships of the desert sun. Through every experience, they learned to rely on each other in ways that went beyond physical strength. Their bond had grown into a deep emotional connection, one built on trust, respect, and shared values. The tall Apache woman began to notice the little gestures that made their relationship special. He remembered small details she mentioned days or weeks earlier. He offered help before she even asked. He noticed her moods and responded with patience and understanding. In return, she began to share more of herself, her dreams, her fears, and her hopes for the future. She realized that vulnerability was not a weakness, but a bridge to deeper connection, and she trusted him fully for the first time in her life. Over time, the villagers began to see the subtle signs of their bond. When the rancher and the tall Apache woman worked together, there was a harmony that went beyond skill. There was laughter, patience, and a sense of balance that inspired everyone around them. They became an example of partnership in its truest form, not based on fear, control, or domination, but on equality, respect, and mutual support. People began to speak of them with admiration, not just for their strength, but for the strength of their connection. As the seasons changed, the rancher and the tall Apache woman grew closer in ways that were quiet yet profound. They shared meals, stories, and tasks, but also moments of reflection and joy. They explored the desert together, observing the plants, the animals, and the beauty of the land. The tall Apache woman taught him the traditions of her people, while he shared knowledge of the broader world beyond the village. Through this exchange, they both grew wiser, more capable, and more connected, not just to each other but to the life around them. One morning, as the first light of dawn broke across the plains, the rancher brought her a simple gift, a small carved piece of wood shaped like an animal they had often seen together on the plains. It was a token of respect, admiration, and understanding. The tall Apache woman held it in her hands, feeling the thought and care behind it. In that moment, she realized the depth of their connection. It was not flashy or loud, but quiet, steady, and true. It was the kind of bond she had always dreamed of but had never thought she would find. Their partnership also grew in courage. When dangers arose, a wild animal threatening the village, a sudden storm, or a challenge with the land, they faced them together. The tall Apache woman's strength and skill, combined with the rancher's patience and knowledge, allowed them to handle situations that would have been overwhelming alone. They learned to trust each other instinctively, knowing that together they could overcome any obstacle. This trust was not only practical but emotional, creating a foundation for the future that was strong, reliable, and unshakable. Over time, she realized that her feelings had changed completely. The rancher was no longer just a companion or partner in work. He had become someone essential to her life. She admired him, trusted him, and valued his presence above almost all else. She began to dream of a future together, not out of need but out of choice. She wanted him by her side, not to diminish her independence but to share it fully. She understood that love was not about control or compromise. It was about partnership, respect, and equality. The rancher, too, felt the depth of his feelings. He admired her courage, her skill, and her independence, but he also loved the kindness, intelligence, and heart that lay beneath her strength. He never sought to change her or challenge her independence. Instead, he wanted to walk beside her, support her, and share life's joys and struggles equally. He waited patiently for her to recognize the same truth, knowing that love built on respect and understanding was the strongest kind. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant colors over the desert horizon, they sat together watching the sky and reflecting on all they had shared. The tall Apache woman reached for his hand, feeling the warmth, steadiness, and reassurance it offered. In that moment, words were unnecessary. They had already built a life together through trust, respect, and partnership. They had faced challenges, learned from each other, and shared countless moments of joy and laughter. Their bond had grown into something enduring, meaningful, and unshakable. Finally, the village celebrated a simple, quiet union of two remarkable people. It was not a ceremony of grandeur, but one of love, respect, and equality. The tall Apache woman, who had long walked alone and faced life's challenges with courage and independence, now stood beside the rancher as an equal partner, sharing a life filled with trust, understanding, and joy. They continued to work together, teach together, and care for the community together, their partnership serving as an example of the strength and beauty that comes from true equality. The tall Apache woman had discovered what she had been longing for all her life, a companion who respected her fully, admired her strength, and shared her values. The rancher had found someone remarkable, whose courage, intelligence, and spirit inspired him daily. Together, they built a life that honored both of them, proving that independence and partnership could coexist, that strength could be shared, and that love built on respect and understanding was the strongest kind of all. As the sun rose over the village each day, casting light across the plains and mountains, the tall Apache woman and the rancher continued their life together. Their bond remained unshakable, their partnership a testament to patience, courage, and mutual respect. They faced each day with determination, joy, and the quiet knowledge that together, they could overcome any challenge and embrace every opportunity. The story of the tall Apache woman, once feared and admired for her independence, had transformed into a story of partnership, love, and hope, one that would inspire generations to come. And so, her journey came full circle. She had grown, learned, and waited patiently for someone who could match her spirit. In the rancher, she found not someone to control her, but someone to walk beside her, equally strong, equally respected, and equally loved. Together, they created a life that was richer, fuller, and more meaningful than either could have imagined alone. And in the vast desert under the endless sky, the tall Apache woman finally found the partnership and love she had always deserved.